let's take a look at the required. So I mean, essentially what we did was that we read through the paper and just sort of to anticipate sort of things that they would ask us. We looked at where our thought process was taking us without actually having seen the required, right? So if we take a look at the required now, the first part says, discuss whether Pine will have any obligations to report issues arising from the acquisition and rezoning of the series property as reflected in the summary of minutes of the board meeting held on 13 September 2022, once he took note of the decisions taken. Then they tell us, do not provide a detailed description of how Pine should go about discharging any reporting responsibilities he may have. And they've asked us to do that for 7 marks. So based on the things that we discussed around Pine, do you believe that we've, generated 7 or more marks in relation to Pine's responsibility?
Hi, Noku. Before we proceed, I just wanted to ask with regards to the technical aspects of answering these questions. When we get the question paper in that 15 minutes, is it just going to be the questions first and then the required comes afterwards?
That's what I understand. I'm not sure if that's how it still works, but that's what I understand. I understand that you get your paper first in the reading time, and then after reading time, you will then get the required. So you won't know what they're going to ask you while you're reading, which is why we practice this thought process.
Okay, and then I wanted to also know, because now we're just doing, I'm on CTA level 1, so we're just doing with regards to certain study units. So when we were just reading through everything, I saw that we were also going into our planning, and then we were touching on other aspects of assertions. And because I had already somehow streamlined my thinking, when only we went through maybe the COPC and your companies and your king, then I would have lied. But now I just wanted to know, with regards to ITC and APC, that's where we're going to broaden. But for now, is it basically, was I wrong to streamline the way I've been studying?
So for the test, it's to streamline in accordance to what is in your study guide. So you'll use your tutorial letter to streamline you. These questions that we do are integrated because we do want to prepare you guys for a level of integration. And this kind of integration you'll normally see from an exam perspective, and then again in ITC. But I think for purposes of this, planning is not part of test 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, no, definitely I see that, yes.
Yeah, it's just that, remember yesterday I told you guys that I would show you from an integrated perspective how to take a step back.
Yes, because at the end of the year, we still write it basically on the
right. It's integrated. Yes.
Yes.
So our questions will normally be integrated, but just because they are integrated, it doesn't mean that you will be examined on everything. We just like to give you guys the exposure to integration. And then we also try to make sure that in doing that, we cover the things that will be examined in that phase for you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. So is everybody happy that we had seven marks there, more or less? I actually think we had more than that. Remember, we discussed that Pine's responsibility was not eliminated just because he was not at the meeting, because they shared the minutes with him. We also spoke about the fact that there's a bribe there, and so there's PRICA consequences. We also spoke about the fact that because he's a CA, there's some CPC stuff that he's got to adhere to in terms of being a senior accountant, in terms of considering whether he needs to speak to the auditors about it, in terms of going back to the board of directors. We spoke about Companies Act Section 76. We spoke about him reporting to the police. What else did we speak about? I think we've already come to about nine marks or so there. So is everybody comfortable that they understand that part of the required and what was required from you in this part? Does the silence mean you are not comfortable? Okay, great. Then if we look at required part B, they say discuss any concerns you have about Daisy's conduct with relation to the Companies Act and the CPC. Here we touched briefly on it. We spoke about, her self-interest threats to professional competence and due care with regards to recommending the auditors. We spoke about the fact that she's a CA and so she needs to comply with the CPC. We spoke about the familiarity threats. We spoke about the intimidation threats with the auditors. What we didn't talk about, and that's what I wanted us to and we spoke about her integrity being questionable with regards to the stalls. We also spoke about her self-interest threat to professional behavior with regards to the stalls as well. And then we spoke about Section 77 when it comes to being held liable. What we didn't speak about, and that's what I kept wanting us to get back to, is Section 75 when it comes to Daisy. So Daisy approved. Let's go back to see what she approved. They said here, what would happen was, sorry, where is it? Here. They said that there was going to be an incentive for the executive directors to maximize the profits. And so they will be entitled to an aggregate annual bonus of 20% of the profits earned by PG to be shared equally by the two executive directors. Who are the two executive directors? Daisy and Lily. So what do you guys know about who is supposed to approve director remuneration?
Isn't it supposed to be the shareholders?
Yeah, by special resolution, right?
Yes.
So there was also non-compliance from Daisy's part. And then Daisy was part of this decision. And in terms of Section 75, she was supposed to declare her interest, excuse herself, and not be part of the decision. She made a decision to pay herself a bonus. Why do we think she did that? She was motivated by self-interest. So from a CPC perspective, she had a self-interest threat to her objectivity, right? She had a conflict of interest. And so in terms of Section 210 of the CPC, she's non-compliant there as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so with those considerations, as well as the considerations that we discussed previously around the intimidation threats with the auditors and all of that, are you guys happy that we've generated 10 marks? Looking at the bribe, looking at her integrity, both in terms of the Companies Act as well as the CPC. Is everybody comfortable with this part of the required?
Sorry, can I ask?
Yes.
So for the CPC part, would you have to go through the whole process of identifying the threat? Is it acceptable and safeguards, or do you not need safeguards?
So because this is only 10 marks, there wouldn't be enough space for you to go into the detail of safeguards and things, because once you already identify the threat with the principal, and then you move into discussing the significance and then discussing safeguards, you're running out of marks to write, and then you still haven't discussed many of the other issues, because there's many other issues. And that's what I was talking about yesterday when it comes to looking at your mark allocation and then knowing how much to write. You need to make sure that when you are discussing all of the obvious issues first. So if after writing all of the obvious issues, you then still have space after your mark allocation to include other things, then you can include them. But you need to first look at the core issues. The core issues was that we had intimidation threats, we had familiarity threats, we had self-interest threats, we had self-review threats, all of those already 4 threats. And to have just mentioned that is 4 marks. Then you would still need to go in to explain the issue, right? And then you would still get marks again on that. You would also need to state that Daisy is a CA. And that's now only discussing CPC. We haven't even discussed Companies Act yet. So do you see marks is not enough for you to start discussing safeguards?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that's how you look at your mark allocation, and that's how you decide how much you need to write. So
Okay.
ideally, if I was to look at this, I would start by saying, okay, let me see if I can get 5 things under Companies Act, then let me see if I can get 5 things under CPC. Then you plan your question, you write your stuff, then you see under Companies Act, actually, I only have 4. Let me see if I can try to get 6 things under CPC, and then you know you've got 10 marks. Or you could find under Companies Act, there's only 3 things, and under CPC, you have 7 things. Or you could find under CPC, you only can think of 3 things, but under Companies Act, you can think of 7 things. Then you would discuss it like that, and you would make up your 10 marks. Does that make sense? Is everybody happy with that approach?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Part C was to critically evaluate the appropriateness of the board composition, as well as the suitability of the individual directors serving on the board. That was for 9 marks, but we spent quite a bit of time going through that, talking about independent, non-executive, having the independent lead, looking at who the chairperson was, looking at everybody's qualifications. We looked at people's relationships. We talked about the influence and the lack of ethics and all of that. Is everybody happy that we've covered that for 9 marks? And if you need to analyze a board, you will be able to do so. Okay, great. Then the one that we didn't really discuss was the matters that Daisy should have considered before she could have recommended that the external audit is required for PG's annual financial statements. So remember yesterday we spoke about how the Companies Act has regulations, and the regulations actually specify who needs to be audited. So based on those regulations, those are the things that Daisy actually needed to look at. She needed to look at, firstly, whether or not it was a public entity or a private entity. In this case, we know that it's a private entity, right? Then what else does the regulation say that she needed to consider?
The PI score.
Yeah, she needed to consider the PI score. So, I mean, you guys have the information. You could have calculated the PI score. If you did calculate the PI score, you would have found that it is 107. And then you would have made a conclusion on that, right? Those would have been quite a few marks to calculate that, because you get 1 mark for putting the points for the average employees. You get another mark for the liabilities. You get another mark for the turnover, and then you get another mark for every individual who has an interest. Then you get another mark for calculating the total. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 marks already out of 6 just for calculating the PI score. And then you also needed to look at whether or not the MOI required an audit, right? So is everybody comfortable with this part of the required? And if you need to consider whether or not a company should be audited, will you be able to do that? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up, very few of them, but I'm seeing them. Part E is the planning. They say we should discuss the effect of the information provided on the auditor's assessment of the risk of material misstatement on the assertions for the revenue class of transactions. And in the second part, we should describe the nature and timing of the audit procedures that are needed to respond to the risk of material misstatement in the completeness assertion for the revenue class of transactions. Okay, so we spoke a little bit about risk assessment. From a risk assessment perspective, I think we covered quite a lot. We spoke about, the on-the-shelf system being a reputable system. We spoke about potential occurrence issues. We spoke about potential completeness issues. We analyzed the financials that they gave us, and we spoke about the increases, the one being a 1% increase and the other one 58% and 21%, and what that signals for us, right? We spoke about the directors lacking management, but lacking integrity. But what we didn't do is to link that back to the overall control environment, because where you have managers or management that lack integrity, you have a risk that things won't be done correctly, right? And that you could already see from everything else that was happening in the scenario. What other risks do you guys think we didn't cover? Okay, so we spoke about Daisy being a newly qualified CA, right? And with her being a newly qualified CA, we questioned her expertise on the board, but we didn't take it a step further and link that to a risk, because I mean, if she's not suitably qualified, there's a risk that she's going to make mistakes, right? And those mistakes will translate as material misstatement in the financial statements. Do we agree?
Yes, I agree, Rom, at financial level.
Yes, at overall financial statement level. That is absolutely correct. Okay. So is everybody then happy with the first part of it? We'll then discuss the nature, timing, and extent. That one will go into a little bit more detail because we didn't discuss it at all. Okay, I see thumbs up, so I'm going to continue. So in the second part, what do you guys understand when it comes to nature, timing, and extent? Okay, well, they don't want extent, they just want nature and timing. What does nature mean?
Nature will be referring to the types of procedures that will be performed.
Yeah, so when it comes to that, the type of testing, remember yesterday we spoke about it, we said you can either test controls or you can test substantively, right?
Yes.
So when it comes to this, what nature of testing do you think would be applicable? Remember we spoke about them having IT systems and we spoke about the controls a little bit. So would you want to test the controls?
To do tests of controls or substantive procedures?
Yeah, or you could do both, right?
Okay.
But you need to explain. You need to explain that it's possible for you to do test of controls. It's also possible for you to do substantive procedures. You would want to do both, and then you need to motivate why, right? So from a control testing perspective, the fact that they're using an off-the-shelf point of sale system and a reputable cloud-based system, you are motivated. You want to test controls, right?
Yes.
Also worried that there's concern in the control environment. Management's integrity is questionable. So that makes you feel like maybe there'll be management override of controls. I mean, you've already seen Daisy manipulating the system. Then Daisy is in charge of the whole entire accounting function. So there's no segregation of duties there. So again, controls are not effective. So when it comes to the possibility of testing controls, maybe it's not possible to test controls, right? But you don't stop there, because then you need to think, according to the ISA, they say you must decide whether it would be necessary to test controls. It's only necessary to test controls when substantive testing alone will not be sufficient. Do you think that substantive testing alone will not be sufficient based on how you understand this company to operate?
Yes,
many
yes,
transactions.
I'm thinking about the the risk around revenue because of the things that you saw, especially when it comes to daisies. God, daisies, the
conduct,
things,
the behavior,
yes, the
yeah.
conduct, yes. So the
Yes,
risk is quite high. So I think doing both will actually decrease the auditor's risk.
correct. But is it possible to do test of controls? That's the thing. ISA only says you can only do test of controls if you have an expectation that controls are operating effectively. Knowing that Daisy manipulates the system, do you believe controls are operating effectively?
No.
So you can't test controls. You would probably have to go fully substantive.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's also another mark because that's another consideration. Then we spoke about the lack of integration of the different accounting systems, right? So there'll need to be a bigger focus, like what you're saying correctly. So we'll have to test higher. The risk is higher. So if the risk is higher, we need to perform more procedures. So there'll be more substantive procedures because there's no integration. We're also seeing that there's a lot of manual intervention because Bridget is able to go in and manipulate things and delete things. We also can't really place reliance on the trends because of COVID. So COVID has distorted the picture a bit. So we don't really know what's normal for the revenue and what's not normal, right? So we definitely need to do substantive testing. Then in terms of the timing, planning of the audit is only starting in December, more than 2 months after year end. Remember, we discussed that. So they won't be able to do an interim audit, right? They'll probably only do all of the procedures at year end. That speaks to the timing. Do we agree? Do we disagree?
Can you please repeat the timing part? I didn't really
So
understand that.
timing refers to when you do your testing, right? According to the ISA, it's possible for you to do interim testing as well as year-end testing. Interim testing is normally done during year-end, right? So remember, we would have drawn a timeline because I said the timeline would be important. And it looks like the planning only started in December, which was 2 months after year-end. And that's what we discussed a little bit earlier when I said that year end was in September and financial statements need to be out in 6 months, but the planning is only starting in December. So if planning is starting in December after year end and interim testing is normally performed during the year, it's clear that it's not possible to do interim testing.
Can I ask, when
Yes.
it comes to, yes, to interim, right? Their year end, it's September. Then I think the planning, it was started in December.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So okay. Can't we then say it? Okay. Although I think on the other side, I'm on a borderline on this one. Let me put it like that. I'm sort of conflicted to say, although the planning, the planning has started right in December, right? But now we are not sure if if the financials are ready. Most of the time, some of the companies issue them after 3 months. They need some time to actually prepare. Then can't we then do interim work on certain, for example, this components, since they are talking about revenue, can't we then do like some sort of a selection in the meantime for a portion of revenue? Then once we receive the full financials, and then after that's when we can continue with the audit, rest of the information.
The ISA doesn't prescribe that that is how you should audit, despite the fact that many of you in your auditing firms already do that. But the ISA doesn't prescribe that that's what you need to do. The ISA says you will test interim testing while the audit is happening during the year, and then you will do year-end testing at the end of the year. So the risk with what you are suggesting is that you'll receive a trial balance that is not final, and then you will calculate materiality on an amount that is not final, and then you will start to do testing And then while you're doing testing, your client is busy passing adjustments. At the end of doing your testing, you realize that your materiality is incorrect because your revenue figure is no longer what it was supposed to be. All the things have changed, and all the work that you've done is actually now for nothing. And now you need to start again. You would have wasted time. Remember, you do an audit of financial statements. You don't do an audit of a TB. So the client needs to give you financial statements.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking about, because some of the companies, they do they do some of statements that needed to be submitted. Like, let's say, for example, for those that are reporting in treasury, one of the audits that I was assisting in. So that's where I'm coming from, to say they needed to report, right, to prepare financials each and every quarter. And then those financials must be supported by those TBs and. So I thought maybe since this that's how interim comes in. So to use the financials that were reported to the external party, and then we can audit those. But no, I do get you on this one. It's not actually clear.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay, guys. So we would have now then discussed nature, timing, and extent. Is everybody happy that they understand what needs to be discussed under the nature, timing? They're not extent, because they're not asking extent. They're only asking nature and timing here. But is everybody clear? Okay. I believe that I have addressed everything in this tutorial. And that's what I had planned for you guys today. Are there any questions?
Okay.
Sorry, madam. Hello. Sorry.
Hi. Yes.
Yes. If that to say, discuss what to the extent.
The extent will talk about your sample size. Will you select a higher volume of samples, or will you select a low volume of samples? Do you feel you need to test more aggressively, or do you think light testing is possible? That is the extent of testing.
Okay, I see.
You're going to choose a sample based on a higher risk or a lower risk. So when the risk is high, your sample will be high, and when the risk is low, your sample will be low. When materiality is low, your sample will also be high, and when materiality is high, then your sample will be low.
Okay, got that, yes.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay, so I wanted to ask how you link the nature timing to the last part of the required, to the completeness section of revenue. I got the part where you were talking about the nature and timing, but how do you then link it to the completeness while we are still answering the required? Like,
to be honest, this part is actually a little bit irrelevant because it talks about the audit process as a whole. Whatever it is that you remember, we spoke about the nature of testing. We spoke about test of controls. So you will then perform tests of controls that would speak to completeness. Your control testing would be procedures that are designed to address completeness. In this case, they haven't asked us to formulate the audit procedures. So what you're talking about is actually a little bit of a step further. Even if the required didn't have this part, even if you took this part out, the answer would still be the same as what we just discussed now. And even if they changed this assertion to occurrence, the answer would still be the same as what we just discussed now.
Okay, so my focus would be on the nature and timing.
Yes. Whether you're going to go a combined approach or whether you're going to go fully substantive.
Okay.
And that's where you discuss your test of controls versus substantive procedures.
Okay.
Okay, everybody happy? Right, guys. Wishing you all the best in your preparations. I hope that this class was helpful and useful, and that you've learned something, or even realized that maybe you have a theory gap and you need to go back and look at your work before the test, and hopefully there's enough time for you to prepare before you write your first test. All the best, and I'll see you in phase 2.
Before you go,
Yeah.
Please ask on behalf of, like, I don't know about the others, may you please ask them to post the slides, please, 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 when they post this video too.
Okay, I will make a note to do that tomorrow in the morning when I talk to the caretaking team. I didn't speak to them yesterday because we ended a bit late. I'll speak to them tomorrow morning.
Okay. No, thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
also, are we getting the
Thank you,
solution?
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Can I just ask, please, are we going to get the solution of these questions?
Please chat with the caretaking team. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not very good with answering admin questions. Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a good evening and then good luck. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.